underground till 100. I'll be with you, I hope.
Hello, my name is Dean Contover. This is the Current Buzz. Thank you for watching today. Today we have the Honorable State Senator from Lexington, Michael Barrett. He has been a state senator. It's almost 10 years now, right? I can't believe it. It's 10 years.
I represented Chelmsford for 10 years.
Yeah, I mean, I can remember you being on the show when you were running.
Right.
That was 10 years ago.
It was.
So welcome back to Chelmsford. I know you're in Massachusetts. Welcome back to Chelmsford. Anything new that you could tell me about Chelmsford? What's going on? Anything?
Well, there's lots that's going on. You know, we're still focused in the legislature. I actively work a lot with town government here.
Okay.
We're still focused on making sure that the center rehabilitation project is funded with some state money as well as some federal money. You know, the sidewalks, the road widening, that's all proceeded pretty well. But there's still some odds and ends where
I have a question about that.
Yeah.
There has been talk for years and years and years in town of putting the wires underground.
Yes, right.
Is that still
in the town center?
Is that still?
It's still a live possibility. Okay. It's very expensive.
Yeah.
If you're going to take current cables and put them underground, even to transmit electric power around the town or the state, it's about 3 or 4x. In other words, 300% more expensive.
Wow.
And it's harder to maintain, right?
Okay.
Those annoying lines overhead enabled the workforce to shimmy up them and get to them pretty quickly
Right.
for repairs or when they're brought down. You put the cables underground. The good news is that snow-laden tree branches or storm-driven tree branches don't land on them,
Right.
take the power out. But the rest of the news is that you have to excavate the cables to get to them, and there's a lot more expense involved ultimately.
Okay.
So nevertheless, you should do it for aesthetic reasons whenever you can afford to.
Right.
But it is a significantly greater expense, and that requires us to effect a balancing act.
All right. I just want to know. I did some research, and they said that you were assistant majority leader. Now, what does that mean for people who don't know government and so forth? What does assistant majority leader?
Well, first of all, something about that people should know about the Massachusetts State Senate.
Okay.
Chelmsford has one state senator. That's me.
That's correct.
It has 3 state reps. Now, statewide, there are 160 state reps, and again, Chelmsford has a delegation of 3 very able people,
Right.
I might add.
Thank you.
Massachusetts has 40 state senators, and I'm one of the 40. I represent 8 communities, and I live in Lexington, but includes Concord, Bedford, Weston, Lincoln,
Wayland?
not
not
Wayland.
Wayland anymore?
Bedford, Carlisle, and Chelmsford. So Chelmsford and Waltham are the 2 largest, and so I spend a lot of time worrying about finances here in town and making sure that we get some help from the state budget, and which has been a sore point historically for Chelmsford for years,
It
as
has.
you know.
Yeah.
But we're making gains in terms of what they call earmarks for the town center and for the senior center. I might.
Oh, is that
which
right?
has been a focus of mine for years.
Oh.
The senior center can benefit always from a little additional focused state attention, and that's one area where I really concentrate a lot of effort. It's behind the scenes, but almost every year in the state budget, the Chelmsford Senior Center has gotten special money to enable it to maintain its programming and rehab the facility.
Okay, I'm gonna invite you to the Veterans Breakfast at every
I am
last Thursday.
Pat, one of your select people, one of your members of your select board, Pat Weegis, invites me to the Veterans Breakfast, and I make it. It happens to be a day. I have a lot of veterans events, so you need to pick and choose.
Well, no,
communities. I would love to come back.
Yeah, no, every last Thursday of the month at 9 o'clock, they have a veterans breakfast.
Oh, I see. A regular,
yeah.
not in,
Yeah.
I got you. I hear you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
No, Veterans Day is another story, and we'll talk about that some other time. So I know that a quick thing I want to talk to you about gambling in Massachusetts. I was recently.
I know that's an interest of yours.
No, I'm not interested in gambling. I just want to talk about gambling in general in regards to going down to high school and college levels where they think they know gambling and there's professional gamblers out there.
Right.
And to take their money.
I oppose extending gambling on college games and high school games, I'll tell you. I think that would be a mistake. Gambling is something that grown adults are free to do if they want to do, and some people like it in modest supply or modest experience, just as for the fun of it. But obviously there's an addiction issue there too. There tend to be always some tensions with the criminal element. I like the idea of college athletes being able to make a little money from sponsorships, because not all the money should go to the institution.
No, that's true.
And none to the young person. But the betting, I'm not in favor of extending it to college sports.
Okay. Understandable, and that was a big problem.
Yes, that was a big controversy.
But it's passed. I mean, I was down in New Jersey and Pennsylvania area, Philadelphia. I was watching Philadelphia television, and half the ads were gambling ads. I mean, that's
That's too much.
I mean, that's too much. I mean, and so I just want to talk to you about. I know your big thing is climate change, right?
Right. Well, I chair the committee that has to do with climate policy.
Okay. And there's a new book out by Douglas Brinkley called Silent Revolution, in regards to Silent Revolution, the book that
Silent Spring.
Silent Spring. I'm sorry. Silent Spring that
Yes.
came out in 1962.
Yes.
And what was
I
it,
remember reading
Crossing?
it. I remember reading it in high school. It was and I think you did too. It really was effectively the beginning of the environmental revolution as we currently know it. This was before climate change.
Right.
This had to do with the poisons and the pesticides we were then using. DDT.
Clean Air.
Was a famous one. And then eventually in 1970, under Richard Nixon of all people,
Right.
Protection of air quality became a big priority. He created, I think, the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency.
He did.
I think the first Earth Day was around 1970
April
or so.
22nd, 1970, I think.
Yeah,
you're
which
right.
is the year I graduated from college, just to date
okay.
myself. So all the early makings of the environmental movement shaped a lot of my awareness.
Right.
And the research, has held up. The accumulation of poisons and materials. Now we have microplastics that can even occur in the drinking water. Tiny plastic molecules that you can't see with the naked eye.
Wow.
That turn out to exist throughout the ocean, but actually show up, as I say, in our food and in our
Can we
drinking
filter
water.
that out? I mean,
Yes, we can, but it's expensive like everything else. The point is to keep moving ahead, keep funding the research at the universities. UMass Lowell actually does a lot of work on plastics and material science.
yeah, they always
for
had.
example.
Yeah, they always had. A plastic
You got to
program.
keep funding that research, because you do. Sometimes the news is good, sometimes the news is bad. Continue to learn new things, and you simply have to adjust course to maintain people's health when the new news emerges.
Okay.
Very important. So, but it all started in the 1960s with the publication of Rachel Carson's Silent Spring, and it's terrific that Douglas Brinkley is reminding a younger generation, maybe 2 or 3 younger generations, that this fight's been going on for over 50 years. Every generation feels like it's discovered every issue: the civil rights issue, the climate issue, the environmental issue. It's important, though, to become familiar with the antecedents so that we can recognize mistakes before we make them again.
A good example, you said that you went to college in the 70s, and so did I.
In the late 60s,
In the late 60s. What I was about to tell you and remind people in the audience, if you lived in L.A., the smog was really bad. I mean, they talked about at one time having fans on the mountains and pushing the air over the mountains.
I remember those illustrations, right?
If you remember that. New York City, if you went to New York City in 1950s, 1960s, there was pollution there.
Right.
And there was smog.
Well, if you visit Beijing in China today or New Delhi in India, you've got a real air quality problems, right, are actually returning even to American cities out west, and particularly. One thing we should be proud of in Massachusetts is that we monitor the air quality pretty closely. We need more air quality monitors that we have. Still, the EPA air quality monitors that we do deploy throughout the state suggest that by and large, the air quality here is pretty good compared to areas out west. And the water quality is also very good. We have a rigorous water quality program.
Right.
So we learned something from Rachel Carson. Early on, we started to monitor the air, the water, and the soil to make sure that pesticides don't sit there poisoning crops we might raise
or animals.
Or animals. Yeah. So we're hardly perfect, but we do our job, and of course then, once you do a job reasonably well, we all forget that there was even a problem. We don't give
Good point.
We don't give government much credit.
Good point.
We tend to focus on what needs remediation, but the air, the soil, the water, Massachusetts for years has done a decent job.
I'll give you an example. I had a friend that came from Eastern Europe, and she couldn't believe the air quality in Massachusetts, how clear it was, etc. And because she was telling me, and I've been to her country in Eastern Europe, and she was telling me that when the air quality was bad, they kept the children indoors.
Yeah, which when you think about it, it's like a COVID restriction permanently or semi-permanently. Pretty daunting stuff.
That was under communism.
Yes,
but, you
right.
know, I mean, so I'm sure things have changed.
I think things are progressing, but you have to stay on it, right?
Yeah, exactly, and that's why I brought you in so we could talk about it.
Yeah.
A big thing is, I want to ask you this. Explain the Green New Deal to me and the audience, as simple as possible.
Well, as simple as possible, it doesn't mean one thing.
That's what I thought.
It's a marketing label,
right?
It gets slapped on things, and actually we need to be a little careful because people appropriate the term for political advantage. Sometimes it's justified, sometimes it isn't. In its original form, it was an idea advanced for a massive, all fronts push against climate change at the congressional level in Washington, D.C.
Right.
The original Green New Deal was conceived by lay people but picked up early by AOC.
Okay.
And then by
Congressman from New York.
And then by Senator Ed Markey.
I'm sorry, Congressperson. I'm sorry.
That Green New Deal has never become law.
I see.
Because it was a massive spending program, and we needed some version of that because COVID had really killed the economy very unexpectedly. It wasn't a usual economic downturn, it was sudden death. President Biden, to his credit, did a form of the Green New Deal, not as expensive, but enough of it to really inject serious money. You'll recall that people got direct cash payouts when families were hurting.
Right.
There was direct cash benefit for working class families and poor families. Then there's been the American Recovery Act, ARPA funds sent, some directly to Chelmsford and other towns, much of it to state government. Then there's been the Inflation Reduction Act most recently, which is a serious, that's the climate bill that Joe Manchin was holding up for months and then suddenly let through, which was a terrific thing. Because here's what's changed in the climate movement in the last 2 years, and I've watched this with fascination. There was a time when legislators had to make the argument that we had to do it because greenhouse gases are killing the planet. Not a bad theme to mention. What's changed, though, is that this has become a driver of jobs, a driver of employment, especially blue-collar employment. last evening, I went to the annual National Convention of the American Society of Mechanical Engineers. It was in Boston.
Wow.
The two major university systems sponsoring the ACME gathering are Northeastern and the UMass system. So last evening, the Chancellor of UMass Boston was there. We heard a message from UMass Amherst, Kumbal Sumaswamy, the Chancellor there. UMass Lowell was mentioned because it educates a good many engineers and cares about the climate.
Right.
So you've got these three UMass campuses in particular. I guess you could add UMass Dartmouth to the list, really, because they're down in southeastern Mass where a lot of the offshore wind is going to happen. And here's the change. It's not just anymore about generating clean energy because the planet's choking. It's also about the economy. Green jobs are not, and the Green New Deal, if you want to talk about that label, is no longer really a liberal movement. It is a jobs movement. And what I've seen, it's become big business. And last evening, for example, the entire gathering at UMass Boston consisted of engineers, and here's what struck me about them. First of all, overwhelmingly young. Changing the Earth's orientation toward climate change is a young person's business, not just because young people are worried about climate change, as they certainly are, but because young engineers are going into the business. Solar panels, offshore windmills, energy efficiency, replacing the gas or oil furnace in your house, in your basement when it reaches the end of its useful life and it's time for you to consider a heat pump, which people should consider, actually.
All right.
Because Mass Save gives you a $10,000 subsidy to reduce the cost. It starts to be a pretty good deal. So these were young engineers last night, employed at the moment by European countries, because it's the UK and Denmark and Norway that have put offshore windmills in the North Sea in Europe. They're all coming now to Massachusetts. Massachusetts aced out the West Coast. It moved more quickly, and here's why. In the West Coast, the waters off the coast of California, Oregon, and Washington State are very deep. So the offshore windmills producing electricity float on deep water.
Wow.
What people don't realize about Massachusetts and about, it goes up to Maine and down to New York and New Jersey, is that the waters are pretty shallow. There's a shelf. They call it the Atlantic Coastal Shelf. You can put offshore windmills off Massachusetts, as we're about to do, and they rest on a firm bottom, much less expensive to construct, and the engineering and the science is less complicated. So we have finally, we have an advantage over the West Coast. Massachusetts, of all the East Coast states of the United States, has moved the quickest to put these windmills off the coast, out of sight, I might add, but resting on a firm ocean floor. And we're going to have the first windmills up, 64 of them, cranking electricity for Massachusetts to use by the end of next year.
Wow.
So this stuff, and Fall River, New Bedford, is the first provisioning place where all the stuff is assembled onshore with a lot of blue-collar jobs. Because remember, this is an economic windfall, potentially, for our state. A lot of a lot of electrician jobs, a lot of carpentry jobs, a lot of jobs for laborers, a lot of jobs, and then for mechanical engineers, civil engineers, and chemical engineers.
Plus maintenance, too, of these.
And ongoing maintenance, although they're largely automated, to be honest with you.
Yeah, but I mean, still.
So there's a little, but it's the construction that it's the equivalent. People don't appreciate this. We used to complain about the Big Dig, but actually the Big Dig, in retrospect, was a great project for Greater Boston, and also created a lot of construction during the time it was going on. This is bigger than the Big Dig. This is the biggest dig of all.
Wow.
And it's going to start in Fall River, New Bedford, but it's going to move up closer to Chelmsford because Salem turns out to be a port here in Massachusetts with no obstructing bridges. Even New Bedford Harbor, which is an important jumping off place for offshore windmills, has a hurricane barrier to protect the harbor, which makes it very hard to barge in the huge components to assemble on shore. And in Fall River and Somerset, there is a big bridge which prevents the biggest ocean-going vessels that will bear this equipment originally
I
from
see.
Europe from passing under. Salem has no obstructing bridges.
Wow.
And we're going to invest a lot in the harbor, which is going to employ a lot of people. And then with that renovated harbor, including all the onshore capabilities, we're going to put together a lot of these components and ship them offshore to the windmill farms. So this is a big deal, and young people shouldn't. We should take note of the fall off in hiring in computer sciences, although medium-sized firms are hiring. So everybody laid off from Meta or from Facebook or from Amazon or from Microsoft can hope to hire on with a smaller computer sciences outfit. But then you've got life sciences still going strong, and you've got offshore wind and solar coming on right after that. Massachusetts economy and the prospects for young people look pretty good if we can just find a way to enable them to afford the housing around here.
Yeah, that's a good point. I want to ask you this. How will they hold up against a hurricane in the Atlantic?
These days, the resiliency planning to make these things capable of withstanding is a very important part of the engineering. In fact, it was talked about last night with several of the engineers
I was there last night. Yeah.
So they're thinking about two things. One is, how do you build this stuff so that it withstands rare weather events that aren't quite as rare, unfortunately, as they used to be? But secondly, we're also building this stuff to anticipate security, meaning cyber security challenges and even physical espionage of the sort that took place recently in North Carolina.
Yeah, let's talk about that. I mean, are you concerned about the electrical grid?
Well, I have been concerned. We passed a major law in 2021. We've passed two major climate bills in Massachusetts. And here's what I wrote into the first of the two, which became law. With Governor Baker vetoed it, and then we overrode his veto, so it's now the law of the land here. And I took a look at the Department of Public Utilities, the DPU. It's a low-profile agency that sets your natural gas rates and your electric power rates, so it's key.
Yep.
We had to give the DPU a new marching orders because the legislature creates these agencies and has to determine what they're going to do and what they're going to think about. And the DPU, to its credit, had thought about your supply of electricity or natural gas and the price you pay. So it was affordability and access. But they hadn't ever been told by the legislature to think about reducing greenhouse gases, to think about equity, fairness, which is of great concern to a city like Lowell, but also to think about safety, because you had the natural gas explosions in the Merrimack Valley around Lawrence and around Andover and North Andover.
I remember them, yes.
So we have to have the DPU focusing on safety and then security, meaning cybersecurity and physical security. We managed to write that into state law, Dean, in 2021. So what's happening in North Carolina is alarming, but we did anticipate stepped up terrorist activity of one kind or another.
Right.
And we've told the DPU, think about price, because people in Chelmsford can't afford to pay through the nose for energy, but also think about safety, think about security, and think about climate change.
You know, isn't it interesting that Saudi Arabia, which is a wealthy country, is converting to a climate change policies with solar and wind
eventually,
energy.
they've been pretty darn slow, to be perfectly candid, but they are doing it a little bit.
They are doing it, but they want
and
us.
I hope they let women drive while they're at it. That would be nice.
I think they are, but what they're doing is want us to still use their energy, but while they convert to these other energies, because
Saudi
they know
Arabia is
they know that. I'm sorry. They know that oil and gas are finite.
Well, Dean, you're by the way, I want to compliment you. You're informed about this stuff. You clearly.
I don't know. I read a lot, and I talk to a lot of people like yourselves.
Well, that's clear that's the case. I don't think Saudi Arabia has been a great friend to us. They're underwriting Russia's price for its oil and natural gas at a time when Russia has doing terrible things in the Ukraine.
No doubt about that.
Saudi Arabia's and of course they also kill their own citizens, Khashoggi. So Saudi Arabia's, I'm not a fan. Nevertheless, you're right. They are recognizing that they have to diversify.
That's right.
And that is a significant concession on their part. Now sitting there in the desert, though, in truth, they could have much more solar generated electricity than they do.
No doubt
they are
about it.
laggards to the party, but at least they're trying to crash the party, which is more than we could say 10 years ago.
They want us to use oil and gas while they wean themselves off of that.
Right.
But
And we should, quite frankly, find a way to move away from any fossil fuel where the revenues are going to support Russia's aggression and the aggression of its or human rights abuses of the sort that Saudi Arabia is guilty of.
I'd like to talk something real quick in regards to electric cars, in regards to chargers. What's happened in Massachusetts and the United States?
Well,
because
a lot.
people are buying electric cars.
Yes, they are.
And
Yeah, I'm no fan of Elon Musk's, but the good news is that makes and models of electric cars other than Teslas are coming on board quickly, and they don't cost quite as much. So I'm pleased. A Subaru, which is a popular car here in Massachusetts and a popular car in this town, I might add, is coming out with its first EV late in 2023. It's technically, the Solterra is around, but you can't find a single one in an auto dealer anywhere in Massachusetts.
All right.
They've never really arrived from dockside.
What about chargers?
And chargers, so this inflation reduction, the feds have come forward with a lot of federal money to put chargers across the country.
That's a good idea.
And we have mandated that Mass DOT, our transportation agency, make sure that chargers are along state roads and highways, and that would include Route 3, for example. So we put that into the state law and given them additional money. I think you're going to see chargers really crop up in the next 24 months. At the moment, we're shorter on the cars than we are on the chargers. You can find some chargers here in town. Most of the charging, 80% of all the charging that people do for their electric cars takes place in their own driveways or their own
Let's speak
garages.
to that. Let's speak to that. My mother has elderly friends, and they don't have garages, and the problem is it's very difficult for them to go outside and plug it in the wintertime.
Yeah,
and
there
that's
are
where the
solutions
difficulty
coming.
is. All right. What about apartments also, in regards to people living in apartments?
So there's the city of Melrose here in Massachusetts is pioneering this technology. This is very interesting. And this is something that older folks can master. You take your cell phone and you use an app and you instruct the app, you send directions to a telephone pole, basically a pole in the parking lot of your condo. And you tell the system, lower the charger, which is kept high up on a pole in order to make sure that vandals can't reach it. The charger slides down the pole. You plug in your car for overnight. It can be along the curb of a street, or it can be in the parking lot of your condo. And when you're done, you send a signal to your cell phone. The charger slides back up the pole to a safe height. So there is technology that works with respect to curbside charging. You don't need to have your own driveway, your own garage. We know that that's a big issue, and we have the American know-how to tackle it, and you're going to begin to see solutions appear in condo parking lots or apartment parking lots.
It seems like condo garages are now, are they mandatory to put in?
Yes, the state law that I referenced, this 2021 state law, requires that at least 10% of all parking in new construction.
New construction, right.
Include chargers, and I think we're going to increase that. I think we need to increase that percentage to 20%, don't you think?
Well,
because slowly people are able to afford these things. And it's like the heat pump in your house, which you really should look at when you have to replace, especially your oil system. Natural gas, unfortunately, fortunately, is dirt cheap. All that frack stuff that's ruining rural Pennsylvania.
Dirty oil.
Keeps the price down. But heating your house with oil is actually expensive. If you have an oil furnace in your basement, the next time it gives out in a significant way, you should contact Mass Save so that you can get the $10,000 subsidy, and you should put in